The coffee stain on the hem of her dress was 3 years old, a permanent reminder of a morning rush that had ended with scalding liquid and muttered curses. Tonight, as Claire Mitchell pulled the faded navy fabric over her head, she caught sight of that stain in her bedroom mirror and smiled with grim satisfaction. Perfect. Absolutely perfect for what she had in mind. Her roommate, Jenny, stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, shaking her head in theatrical disapproval. "You look like you're going to a funeral for someone you didn't particularly like." "That's the point," Claire said, adjusting the shapeless dress that had once belonged to her aunt. The fabric hung loose around her frame, the color draining any warmth from her complexion. She'd paired it with scuffed flats that had seen better days and deliberately left her hair in the messy bun she'd worn all day while working from home. No makeup, no jewelry, nothing that suggested she'd made even the slightest effort. "Remind me why you're sabotaging yourself again?" Jenny asked, following Claire into the bathroom, where she was now splashing cold water on her face to ensure any remaining hint of radiance disappeared. "Because I'm done with blind dates," Claire said firmly, patting her face dry with a towel that had seen too many wash cycles. "This is the 5th one my mother has set up this year. 5th. If I show up looking like I just rolled out of bed after a 3-day flu, maybe, just maybe, this guy will report back to his aunt, who will tell my mother, and she'll finally stop trying to marry me off to every eligible bachelor in the greater Boston area." It had been 6 months since Claire had returned to Boston after 3 years working for Bennett Worldwide Enterprises in New York. 6 months since she'd walked away from the company she'd loved, the career that had defined her, and, though she'd never admitted this to anyone, the man who had occupied her thoughts far more than was appropriate for an employee to think about her CEO, Michael Bennett. Even now, his name in her mind sent an unwelcome flutter through her chest. She'd been his executive assistant for 2.5 years, working closer with him than anyone else in the company. She'd seen him at his best, commanding boardrooms with the kind of quiet authority that made powerful men lean in to listen. She'd seen him at his worst, exhausted, frustrated, human in ways the business magazines never captured. She'd watched him build an empire with integrity that was rare in their industry, treating every employee with a respect that made loyalty easy, and somewhere in those 2.5 years, she'd made the catastrophic mistake of falling in love with him. Not that he'd ever known. Claire had been scrupulously professional, never crossing a line, never giving any indication that when he'd smiled at her over morning coffee or thanked her for staying late to help prepare for a crucial presentation, her heart had performed acrobatics that would have impressed Olympic gymnasts. She'd left New York because staying had become unbearable. How many times could a woman watch the man she loved date other women? Models, executives, socialites who appeared on his arm at charity galas while she stood in the background with a clipboard. How many times could she sit across from him in his office, so close she could smell his cologne, and pretend her feelings were purely professional? The final straw had come at the annual company gala. Michael had attended with Veronica Ashford, a venture capitalist with legs for days and a laugh that sounded like champagne bubbles. Claire had spent the evening coordinating with caterers and ensuring everything ran smoothly, all while her heart quietly shattered every time she glimpsed them together on the dance floor. She'd submitted her resignation the following Monday, citing family reasons. It wasn't entirely a lie. Her father had been asking her to come home and help expand his small construction business. Michael had tried to convince her to stay, had offered her a significant raise, had looked genuinely distressed at the prospect of losing her, but he'd never given her the one reason that might have made her reconsider. So she'd come home to Boston, thrown herself into helping her father's business transition into commercial development, and tried very hard not to think about gray eyes and a smile that had once been the best part of her workday. Her mother, of course, had taken her return as a sign that Claire was finally ready to settle down, a phrase that made Claire's teeth clench, hence the parade of blind dates with sons of her mother's friends, nephews of her father's business associates, and tonight, the grandson of someone her mother played bridge with on Thursdays. "What do you even know about this one?" Jenny asked as they headed downstairs. Claire grabbed her purse, also deliberately chosen for its shabby appearance. "His name is Ryan. He's in finance. His grandmother and my mother think we'd be perfect together, which statistically means we'll have nothing in common." She checked her phone. "I'm meeting him at Rossini's at 7:30. I'll stay for exactly one drink, plead a headache, and be home by 8:15. You're really committing to this disaster, aren't you? Absolutely. By this time tomorrow, my mother will have heard that I showed up looking like a homeless person who wandered in from the street, and maybe, finally, she'll stop. Jenny hugged her at the door. You know, there are healthier ways to deal with your feelings about Michael. Claire stiffened. She'd told Jenny about her former boss during a wine-soaked evening of confessions, but they'd had an unspoken agreement not to mention him since. This has nothing to do with Michael, doesn't it? You're back in Boston. You're helping your dad with work you're overqualified for, and you're actively sabotaging any chance at meeting someone new. That sounds like someone still hung up on a man she can't have. I'm not hung up, Claire protested, but the words felt hollow even to her own ears. I'm just taking a break from romance. Is that so wrong? Jenny's expression softened. No, honey. But maybe give this Ryan guy a fair shot. You never know. I know, Claire interrupted gently but firmly. I know exactly how this evening will go. Trust me, the drive to Rossini's took 20 minutes through evening traffic. The Italian restaurant was one of the nicer establishments in downtown Boston, which almost made Claire feel guilty about her appearance. Almost. She'd made reservations under Ryan's name, or rather, his grandmother had, and the hostess barely concealed her surprise at Claire's appearance when she arrived. I'm meeting someone, Claire said, chin up, despite the hostess's raised eyebrow. Reservation under Ryan Castellano? Of course, right this way. The restaurant was elegant, all warm lighting and soft music, filled with couples dressed in their evening finest. Claire's shabby dress stood out like a stain on silk. Perfect. She caught several surprised glances as she followed the hostess through the dining room and felt a petty satisfaction at their reactions. The hostess led her to a private corner booth, partially secluded by a decorative screen. Your companion hasn't arrived yet. May I get you started with something to drink? Water is fine, Claire said, sliding into the booth. She pulled out her phone, already composing the text she'd send in 45 minutes. So sorry. Terrible headache coming on. Need to head home. She was so focused on her phone that she didn't notice someone approaching until a familiar voice, a voice that had haunted her dreams for 6 months, spoke from beside the table. Claire? Her head snapped up so fast she nearly gave herself whiplash. Standing beside the booth, looking as stunned as she felt, was Michael Bennett. He was exactly as she remembered. Tall, with dark hair that was slightly longer than typical executive style. Gray eyes that saw too much, and a presence that seemed to command whatever space he occupied. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, and he was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Claire felt her face flame as she registered what she must look like. The awful dress, the messy hair, the complete absence of any effort whatsoever. Of all the people she might run into tonight, Michael Bennett had never even made the list of possibilities. Michael, she finally managed, her voice coming out strangled. What are you doing here? His eyes hadn't left her face, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Surprise, certainly, but also something else. Something that looked almost like hope. I have a dinner meeting, he said slowly. What are you doing here? Before Claire could answer, the hostess appeared again, this time addressing Michael with considerably more warmth than she'd shown Claire. Mr. Castellano, your table is ready. Oh. She looked between them, confusion crossing her features. Are you together? The bottom dropped out of Claire's stomach as understanding crashed over her like a wave. Mr. Castellano. Ryan Castellano. Michael was looking at her with dawning realization, and in his eyes, she saw the exact moment he understood what was happening. Her blind date wasn't some random finance guy named Ryan. Her blind date was Michael Bennett. The silence that followed the hostess's question stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Claire's mind raced through a series of increasingly panicked thoughts. Michael Bennett was Ryan Castellano. Or rather, Ryan Castellano was Michael Bennett, except that made no sense because Michael's last name was Bennett, had always been Bennett, and... Yes, Michael said to the hostess, his voice steady despite the shock still evident in his eyes. We're together. Thank you. The hostess smiled and left, and Michael slid into the booth across from Claire with the same fluid grace he brought to everything. Up close, She could see the fine lines around his eyes that hadn't been there when she'd left New York, the slight tension in his jaw that suggested he was as thrown by this situation as she was. "I can explain," they both said simultaneously, then stopped. Michael gestured for her to continue, but Claire shook her head. "You first. Why is she calling you Mr. Castellano?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she remembered from late nights at the office when he was working through a particularly thorny problem. "Castellano is my mother's maiden name. When my grandmother started suggesting I meet someone, I used it. I didn't want..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I've had experiences with women who were more interested in Bennett Worldwide's bottom line than in me. Using a different name seemed prudent." Claire felt a hysterical laugh building in her chest. "So you went on a blind date under an assumed name?" "So did you, apparently, though technically I didn't assume a name. Castellano is mine, just not the one I use professionally." His eyes traveled over her appearance, and she watched his brow furrow slightly. "Claire, that dress..." Heat flooded her face. "I know. I look terrible. That was intentional." "Why would you intentionally?" Understanding dawned in his expression. "You were trying to sabotage the date." "My mother has been relentless," Claire said defensively, crossing her arms over the hideous dress. 5 blind dates in 6 months. 5. This was supposed to be so awful that whoever showed up would report back what a disaster I am, and maybe she'd finally stop. Something that might have been amusement flickered across Michael's face. "So you wore your worst dress, skipped makeup entirely, and came here planning to stay for exactly 1 drink before faking a headache?" She stared at him. "How did you know about the headache?" "Because that's exactly what I was planning to do." He leaned back against the booth, and for the first time since he'd appeared, something like his usual confidence settled over him. "My grandmother has been on a campaign to see me settled down ever since I turned 35. When she connected with your mother through their bridge club and insisted this match was meant to be, I agreed to 1 dinner, planning to be polite but distant, stay for minimal time, and then tell her I'd tried." Claire processed this information, still reeling from the impossibility of the situation. "Your grandmother plays bridge with my mother?" "Apparently they've become quite close. She's been singing the praises of Margaret Mitchell's daughter for weeks. Smart, capable, working in construction now, which my grandmother found admirably practical. She had no idea you were my former assistant." "Because she doesn't know me as Claire Mitchell," Claire said slowly, puzzle pieces clicking into place. "She knows me as Margaret's daughter, and my mother probably talked about my work with my father's company, but never mentioned where I worked before, and I never told my grandmother who my assistant was, or that she'd left the company." Michael's eyes hadn't left her face. "Claire, why did you really leave New York?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with 6 months of unspoken words. Claire's heart hammered against her ribs. This was the moment she dreaded and secretly longed for. A chance to see him again, to be in his presence, to bask in the attention of those gray eyes that seemed to see straight through every defense she'd built. But she couldn't tell him the truth, couldn't admit that she'd fled because loving him had become a constant ache she couldn't cure, because watching him with other women had felt like slowly bleeding out, because staying had meant accepting a future where she would always be close enough to touch, but never allowed to reach. "Family reasons," she said, echoing the excuse she'd given when she'd resigned. "My father needed help with the business expansion." "Your father has 3 other children, all of whom work in the business." "He didn't need you specifically." Michael leaned forward, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "I've replayed our last few weeks together hundreds of times, trying to understand what I'd done wrong, what had changed. You were happy, or I thought you were. Then suddenly you were leaving, and no amount of reasoning could change your mind." A waiter appeared with menus, briefly interrupting the tension. They both ordered automatically. Claire requested wine she didn't want. Michael asked for scotch. And then they were alone again in their semi-private corner. "You didn't do anything wrong," Claire said quietly, and that at least was true. "Michael, you were the best boss I ever had. The best boss anyone could have. You treated everyone with respect. You built a company with real integrity, and you—" She stopped, realizing she was revealing too much. "I what?" She picked up her water glass just to have something to do with her hands. "You made coming to work something to look forward to. But I needed to move on. I needed to try something different." "Is that why you're sabotaging blind dates? Because you've moved on and are trying something different?" The words were gentle, but they hit their mark. Claire felt her carefully constructed defenses crack. "My mother means well, but she doesn't understand that I'm not ready for this. For dating. For putting myself out there. Because of someone in New York." Her head snapped up. Michael was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something vulnerable beneath the usual executive confidence. "Jenny told me," he said quietly. "Your roommate. She called the office about 3 months ago looking for your forwarding address for some mail that had been misdirected. We got to talking, and she mentioned that you'd left because you'd developed feelings for someone who couldn't return them. She wouldn't tell me who." Claire's mind reeled. Jenny had called Michael, had talked to him about her feelings. She was going to kill her roommate, slowly. "She was trying to help," Michael continued. "I think she hoped I might know who you'd been involved with. Might be able to tell her if there was any hope. I told her I didn't know of anyone, that you'd been professional to a fault. Never dated anyone from the company as far as I knew." "I didn't," Claire whispered. "Then who was it?" The question hung between them, and Claire knew she was at a crossroads. She could lie, could name some fictional man from a different department, could protect herself from the humiliation of rejection, or she could take the terrifying leap of telling the truth. Before she could decide, Michael spoke again, his voice low and rough with emotion. "Because I need you to know that if there's even a chance, if the person you left New York for could ever feel the same way, then he's a fool if he let you go without fighting for you." Something in his tone made her look up sharply. His eyes met hers, and in them she saw something that made her heart stutter. Longing, hope, and a vulnerability she'd never seen from him before. "Michael, I spent 6 months trying to replace you," he said, the words coming faster now, as if a dam had broken. 6 months interviewing assistants who were perfectly qualified, perfectly professional, and not one of them was right. Not one of them anticipated what I needed before I asked. Not one of them challenged me when I was being unreasonable or made me laugh when I was taking myself too seriously. Not one of them was you. Claire couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only stare at him as he continued. "I told myself it was professional, that you were simply excellent at your job and irreplaceable in that capacity. But then I'd find myself looking at the door hoping you'd walk through it. I'd start to share something with whoever was sitting at your old desk and realize they wouldn't get the reference, wouldn't understand why it was funny or significant. I went to the company gala last month, and halfway through the evening I realized I was looking for you in the crowd, forgetting you weren't there anymore. You went with Veronica Ashford," Claire said, and immediately regretted the words. Michael blinked. "You remember that? From last year?" "I remember all of them," she admitted quietly. "All the women you dated while I worked for you. I shouldn't have. It wasn't my business, but I couldn't help noticing." "None of them mattered," Michael said, and the raw honesty in his voice made tears prick at Claire's eyes. "None of them were right, and I didn't understand why until you left, and suddenly the world felt dimmer without you in it." The waiter returned with their drinks, and Claire grabbed her wine glass like a lifeline, taking a too large gulp. This couldn't be happening. Michael Bennett, her former boss, the man she'd loved hopelessly for years, couldn't be sitting across from her in a romantic restaurant, telling her that he'd missed her, that no one could replace her. "Why didn't you say anything?" she whispered. "Before I left, why didn't you tell me any of this?" "Because you worked for me," he said simply. "Because there's an inherent power imbalance between a CEO and his assistant, and I never wanted you to feel pressured or uncomfortable. I told myself that whatever I felt, and I wasn't even sure what I felt back then, I had to keep it professional, had to keep you safe from any inappropriate advances. And then you were leaving, and I thought maybe it was better that way. Cleaner, except it wasn't better at all." Claire set down her wine glass with a shaking hand. I left because I'd fallen in love with you, she said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. I left because loving you was killing me, because watching you with other women was torture, because I couldn't keep working beside you and pretending I didn't want more. I left because staying would have destroyed me. The silence that followed her confession felt enormous. Michael stared at her, his expression cycling through shock, wonder, and something that looked remarkably like joy. Say that again, he said hoarsely. Which part? The part about being in love with me. Claire's heart was pounding so hard, she was sure everyone in the restaurant could hear it. I'm in love with you. I have been for years. That's why I left. That's why I haven't been able to move on. That's why I'm sabotaging blind dates my mother sets up. Because none of them are you. Michael reached across the table and took her hand. His palm was warm against hers, his grip firm and sure. Claire Mitchell, he said. And there was something almost like laughter in his voice. You wore your worst dress to meet me. Despite everything, the tension, the confessions, the sheer impossibility of the moment, she felt a laugh bubble up. I wore my absolute worst dress to meet a stranger named Ryan Castellano. If I'd known it was you, what would you have done? She looked down at their joined hands, then back up at his face, at the man who'd occupied her thoughts and dreams for so long. I would have worn something beautiful. I would have hoped that maybe finally you'd see me as more than just your assistant. I've always seen you as more, Michael said softly. I was just too much of a coward to do anything about it when it mattered. He stood, still holding her hand, and moved around the table to slide into the booth beside her. Up close, she could smell his cologne, the same scent that had haunted her dreams, and feel the warmth radiating from him. Claire, he said, turning to face her fully. I know this is complicated. I know we have things to figure out. Your life is here now. Mine is still in New York. But I need you to know that these last 6 months have been the longest of my life. And sitting here with you now, even in that terrible dress. He smiled, gentle and warm. Is the happiest I've been since you left. It really is an awful dress, Claire said, feeling giddy and terrified and more alive than she had in months. It's the worst dress I've ever seen, Michael agreed, and you still look beautiful to me. Then he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, slow and sweet, and full of 6 months of longing, and Claire finally understood what coming home felt like. When they finally broke apart, Claire felt dizzy, though whether from the kiss or the sheer impossibility of everything that had happened in the last 30 minutes, she couldn't say. Michael's hand was still cradled against her cheek, his thumb tracing gentle circles that made coherent thought nearly impossible. We should probably order dinner, he said, his voice rougher than usual, though he made no move to pull away. Probably, Claire agreed, though food was the last thing on her mind. They stayed like that for another moment, foreheads touching, breathing each other's air, before Michael reluctantly shifted back to give them both space. He signaled the waiter, who approached with poorly concealed curiosity. The same couple who'd arrived separately and seemed shocked to see each other were now sitting on the same side of the booth, glowing with obvious happiness. They ordered without really looking at the menus. Claire requested the first pasta dish she saw. Michael chose something with salmon. And then they were alone again in their private corner. So, Claire said, reality beginning to creep back in around the edges of her euphoria. What do we do now? Michael's expression grew more serious. We figure it out. Together this time. He reached for her hand again, lacing his fingers through hers. Claire, I need you to know that I'm not asking you to come back to New York and work for me again. That chapter is closed. What I'm asking for is a chance to see where this goes, as equals, as two people who care about each other, without any professional complications. But you live in New York. Your entire company is there. Bennett Worldwide has offices in 12 cities, including Boston. We've been talking about expanding the Boston operations for over a year. No, Claire interrupted firmly. Michael, I won't be the reason you uproot your entire life. Your company headquarters is in New York. Your apartment, your friends, everything you've built, it's all there. And you're here. The simple statement nearly undid her. Claire squeezed his hand, trying to organize her thoughts through the emotions threatening to overwhelm her. I'm here because I ran away, because I was hurt and I needed distance, but helping my father with his business. She paused, searching for honesty. It's good work, meaningful work, but it's not what I'm passionate about. I took business development courses, spent 3 years learning from one of the sharpest minds in the industry, and now I'm reviewing construction bids and permit applications. You miss it, Michael said quietly. The challenge, the strategy. I miss parts of it, she admitted. But I don't miss being in love with someone I couldn't have. That was agony, Michael. Every single day. He winced. I'm so sorry. If I'd known, if I'd been braver, we could have had 6 more months together instead of 6 months of misery apart. You couldn't have known. I made sure of that. Claire turned to face him more fully. And I understand why you didn't say anything before. The power dynamic, the professional ethics. You were right to be cautious, but we're not in that situation anymore. We're not boss and assistant. We're just 2 people who happen to be set up by our meddling relatives. A smile tugged at Michael's lips. I'm going to have to thank my grandmother, profusely. Possibly buy her a house. Don't encourage her. Claire laughed. If my mother finds out this worked, she'll never stop taking credit for it. Their food arrived, and for several minutes, they ate in comfortable silence. Claire marveled at how natural this felt, sitting beside Michael, their shoulders occasionally brushing, sharing bites of each other's meals without asking. It was intimate in a way their professional relationship had never allowed, and she found herself relaxing into it, letting the happiness seep into spaces that had been cold and empty for months. Tell me about Boston, Michael said eventually. What's your life like here? Besides sabotaging blind dates and working with your father, Claire set down her fork, considering. Quieter than New York. Smaller. I share an apartment with Jenny. You spoke to her, apparently. She's protective of you. I liked that about her, even when she was being deliberately cryptic about who'd broken your heart. She was trying to help in her misguided way. Jenny's the one who's been pushing me to move on, to give these blind dates a real chance. Claire shook her head. She's going to be insufferable when she finds out how this one went. What about friends? Social life? I have dinner with my parents every Sunday. I've reconnected with some people from high school. There's a book club I go to sometimes, though I'm terrible about actually finishing the books. She paused. It's a good life, Michael. Safe, predictable, but it's also not enough. He finished quietly. She nodded. Not enough. I thought distance and time would help me get over you. Instead, I just feel like I'm in a holding pattern, waiting for something I didn't think would ever happen. Michael set down his own fork and turned to her. Claire, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear all of it before you respond. Something in his tone made her heart clench. Okay. 2 months ago, I was diagnosed with a heart condition. Nothing immediately life-threatening, he added quickly, seeing her expression. But it requires monitoring, some lifestyle changes, and it made me take stock of my priorities. I've spent 10 years building Bennett worldwide, working 70-hour weeks, putting everything into the company. And suddenly I was facing the reality that none of it matters if I'm alone. Claire's hand tightened on his. Michael, let me finish. I started delegating more, promoting people I'd been grooming for leadership positions, restructuring so the company doesn't rely entirely on me. I've been working with my board to set up a succession plan, not because I'm dying, he emphasized, but because I realized I'd built my entire identity around being CEO, and I needed to remember how to be just Michael. Is that why you finally agreed to your grandmother's matchmaking? He nodded. She'd been asking for years, and I'd always brushed her off. But after the diagnosis, when she brought it up again, I thought, why not? What did I have to lose? I wasn't looking for anything serious. I just wanted to prove to her I was trying. His eyes met Claire's. And then you walked in wearing that terrible dress, and suddenly the universe made sense again. Claire felt tears threatening. You should have told me. When you were diagnosed, I would have... You would have what? Come back out of pity? Sympathy? He shook his head. That's not what I wanted. But now, tonight, I get to tell you when we're on equal footing, when there's nothing between us except honesty. The waiter cleared their plates, asked about dessert. They both declined, neither wanting to prolong the meal when there was still so much to say. "What happens next?" Claire asked once they were alone again. "Realistically, Michael, you're in New York with a company to run, health to manage. I'm here with commitments to my father, a lease on an apartment, a life I've been building. I think," Michael said slowly, "we take it one step at a time. I come to Boston as often as I can. Weekends, long weekends when possible. You come to New York when you want to. We talk every day. We figure out what this is and what we want it to become before we make any big decisions about geography. Long distance. For now. With the clear intention of not staying long distance forever." He cupped her face again, his touch achingly gentle. "Claire, I'm not asking you to upend your life tomorrow, but I am asking you to give us a real chance. To see if what we both felt while we were working together can translate into something more when we're not constrained by professional boundaries. And if it doesn't work, if the distance is too much, or we realize we were better as boss and assistant than as whatever this is, then at least we'll know," Michael said. "At least we won't spend the rest of our lives wondering what if. But Claire," his voice dropped, became more intense, "I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think we're going to figure out how to make this work, because neither of us wants to lose each other again." Claire leaned into his palm, letting herself believe in the possibility of it all. "My father's going to ask questions. He knows I left New York because I was unhappy. If I suddenly start going back for weekends, tell him the truth. Tell him you ran into an old friend who wants to be more than friends. Tell him whatever you're comfortable sharing." Michael smiled. "Though if you want to wait to see if this works before introducing me as your boyfriend, I understand." "Boyfriend," Claire repeated, testing the word. "That sounds very high school. Partner? Significant other? The love of your life?" His smile widened at her expression. "Too soon?" "Maybe a little," she said, but she was smiling too. "Let's start with boyfriend and see how it feels." "Deal." They sat there for another hour, talking about everything and nothing. Memories from their time working together, stories from the 6 months apart, hopes and fears about the future. The restaurant began to empty around them, other diners finishing their meals and heading home. But in their private corner, Claire and Michael existed in a bubble of rediscovery and possibility. Finally, reluctantly, Michael signaled for the check. "I should let you get home. Jenny's probably waiting up for a full report." "She absolutely is," Claire confirmed. "I'm supposed to text her when I leave so she knows I'm safe." Outside the restaurant, the autumn air was crisp and cool. Michael had parked several blocks away. He'd walked, not wanting to arrive in his usual town car with driver. Claire's practical sedan was in the opposite direction. "Can I walk you to your car?" Michael asked. "I'd like that." They walked slowly, hands clasped, neither wanting the evening to end. When they reached her car, Michael pulled her close, and Claire melted into his embrace. "I'm staying at the Harbor Hotel through the weekend," he said against her hair. "Have dinner with me tomorrow, somewhere where you can wear a dress you actually like?" Claire laughed, pulling back to look up at him. "I'd love that, though I'm keeping this one. It's clearly lucky." "The luckiest dress in history," Michael agreed, then kissed her again, sweet and lingering. When she finally drove away, watching him wave in her rearview mirror, Claire felt lighter than she had in months. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jenny. "Well?" Claire smiled and typed back, "You're not going to believe this." Jenny was indeed waiting up, curled on their couch with a mug of tea and an expression of forced nonchalance that fooled no one. The moment Claire walked through the door, she sat up straight, eyes wide. "You're glowing," Jenny said accusingly. "You left here 2 hours ago looking like a disaster on purpose, and now you're glowing. What happened?" Claire set down her purse, kicked off her terrible shoes, and sank onto the couch beside her roommate. "Remember when you called Michael Bennett's office 3 months ago?" Jenny had the grace to look slightly guilty. "I was trying to help. You were miserable, and I thought maybe if someone at the company knew where to find you, they could pass along a message or—" She stopped, eyes widening further. "Oh my God, did he call you? Did Michael Bennett call you?" Better, Claire said, unable to keep the smile from her face. He was my blind date. Ryan Castellano is Michael Bennett. For a moment, Jenny just stared. Then she let out a shriek that probably woke their neighbors. Are you serious? Your mother set you up with your former boss? The billionaire CEO you've been in love with for 3 years? His grandmother and my mother conspired completely by accident. Neither of them knew. Claire pulled her knees up to her chest, hugging them. Jenny, he's been looking for me. Well, not actively looking, but he's been missing me. He said no one could replace me, that he's been miserable. And then tonight, her voice cracked slightly, he told me he has feelings for me. Has had them for a while, and we kissed, and we talked. And I'm seeing him again tomorrow. Jenny grabbed Claire's hands. Tell me everything, every single detail. So Claire did. She recounted the shock of seeing Michael at the restaurant, the revelation about their fake names, the confessions that had tumbled out once they'd stopped pretending. She told Jenny about Michael's health scare and how it had shifted his priorities, about their plan to try long distance, about the way her heart had felt like it might burst when he'd called himself her boyfriend. This is insane, Jenny said when Claire finally finished. This is literally the plot of a romance novel. You wore your worst dress to sabotage a blind date and ended up meeting your soulmate. I don't know about soulmate, Claire protested, but she was smiling. Claire, you've been in love with this man for 3 years. You left New York because being near him hurt too much, and he just told you he's been equally miserable without you. If that's not soulmate territory, I don't know what is. Claire let the words settle over her, let herself believe in the possibility. He's staying through the weekend. We have dinner tomorrow, and he asked if I wanted to spend Sunday together before he drives back to New York. What are you going to tell your parents? That was the question that had been nagging at Claire during the drive home. The truth, I think, or at least part of it. I'll tell them I ran into an old colleague, that we're exploring something romantic, but I want to keep it private for now while we figure things out. Your mother is going to have a field day with this. My mother, Claire said firmly, is not going to know that her blind date setup actually worked. As far as she's concerned, Ryan Castellano was a terrible match, and I never want to hear about him again. Jenny laughed. You're really going to keep that from her? For as long as humanly possible. If she finds out this worked, she'll take credit forever. She'll probably write a book. How I Married Off My Impossible Daughter in One Easy Step. They stayed up for another hour, Jenny asking questions, and Claire reliving every moment of the evening. Finally, exhausted and emotionally drained in the best possible way, Claire headed to bed. She changed out of the awful navy dress, which she folded carefully and put in the back of her closet, unable to throw away what was now the luckiest piece of clothing she'd ever owned, and climbed under the covers. Her phone buzzed with a text. Michael. Made it back to the hotel. Still can't quite believe tonight was real. Claire. If it was a dream, I don't want to wake up. Michael. See you tomorrow at 7. There's a French restaurant in Back Bay I've been wanting to try. Claire. I'll be there. And Michael? I'm wearing my best dress this time. Michael. Can't wait to see it. Though you could wear a garbage bag and still be the most beautiful woman in the room. Claire fell asleep with her phone clutched to her chest, smiling like a teenager with her first crush. The next morning, she woke to sunlight streaming through her windows and a sense of lightness she hadn't felt in months. She had breakfast with Jenny, then spent the afternoon in her room trying on every dress she owned. Nothing felt right. Too casual, too formal, too boring, too much. Finally, Jenny intervened. We're going shopping. You're not wearing something from your existing closet to your second first date with a billionaire. You need something new, something that makes you feel amazing. 2 hours and 6 stores later, Claire found it. A deep emerald green dress that hugged her curves in all the right places, with a neckline that was elegant rather than provocative. She paired it with heels that made her legs look endless and delicate gold earrings that caught the light when she moved. That's the one, Jenny declared. You look like yourself, but elevated, confident, happy. At 6:30, Claire stood in front of her mirror, barely recognizing the woman looking back. The contrast to last night's sabotage outfit couldn't have been starker. Her hair fell in loose waves around her shoulders. Her makeup was subtle but polished, and the dress made her green eyes seem to glow. Her phone buzzed. "Michael. I'm outside whenever you're ready. No rush." Claire grabbed her clutch, a much nicer one than last night's shabby purse, and headed downstairs. Michael stood beside a black sedan, and when he saw her, his expression made every minute of preparation worthwhile. He looked stunned, reverent, and absolutely smitten. "Claire," he breathed as she approached. "You're stunning. Better than the navy dress," she teased. "Infinitely better, though that dress will always have a special place in my heart." He opened the car door for her. "Shall we?" The French restaurant was intimate and romantic, with candlelight and soft music. They were seated at a corner table with a view of the city lights, and from the moment they sat down, conversation flowed as easily as it had during their years working together, but now without the professional constraints that had always held them back. Michael told her about the changes he'd made at Bennett Worldwide, how he'd promoted 3 senior vice presidents and restructured his schedule to work more reasonable hours. "I actually took a full weekend off last month," he said, with the pride of someone announcing a major achievement. "Didn't check email once. Who are you, and what have you done with Michael Bennett?" Claire laughed. "The real Michael Bennett has been in hibernation for about 10 years. I'm trying to wake him up, remind him there's more to life than quarterly earnings reports." Claire shared updates about her father's business, about the commercial development project they were bidding on that could triple their company size. "It's exciting, watching something grow from the ground up, literally, in this case." She paused. "But I miss the strategy sessions we used to have, the late nights working through problems, finding solutions no one else had considered." "I miss those too," Michael said quietly. "I miss having someone who understood my vision, who could anticipate where I was going before I got there. I miss you, Claire. All of you. Your brilliant mind, your terrible coffee, your ability to make me laugh when I was taking myself too seriously." "My terrible coffee? The worst I've ever had. You made it so strong I'm surprised it didn't dissolve the cup. You never complained, because you made it for me. That made it perfect." Over dessert, a chocolate soufflé they shared, Michael reached across the table and took her hand. "Claire, I know we agreed to take this slow, to see how long distance works before making any big decisions, but I need you to know that I'm in this. Completely. Whatever it takes to make this work. The commute, the video calls, the complicated logistics. I'm willing to do it because you're worth it." Claire's eyes stung with happy tears. "I'm in this too. Completely." "Good. Because I have a proposition for you, and I need you to hear the whole thing before you respond." Her heart skipped. "Okay." Bennett Worldwide is opening a new division focused on commercial real estate development, specifically sustainable, community-focused projects. We need someone to head it up, someone with strategic vision and an understanding of construction and development from the ground level. Someone who can bridge the gap between our corporate values and practical implementation. His eyes held hers. "I want you to consider taking the position. The office would be here in Boston. You'd have complete autonomy over the division. Report directly to the board rather than to me. We'd be colleagues again, but equals this time. Partners in every sense." Claire stared at him, her mind racing. "Michael, I can't. You can't create a position just for me. That's not. I'm not. We've been planning this expansion for 18 months. The position is real, the division is real, the need is real. But yes, when I was working with the board to structure it, I thought about you, about how perfect you'd be for it, about how maybe, if we could figure out the personal complications, this could be a way for you to come back to the work you love without compromising either of our integrity. What about us, the relationship? Completely separate. The board knows I'm involved with someone. I told them after our dinner last night, because I wanted everything above board. They don't know it's you yet, but they will before any employment decisions are made. If you take the position, it'll be because you're the best person for it, not because you're dating me. And if you decide you don't want the job, that doesn't change anything between us. I meant what I said about making the distance work." Claire's mind spun with possibilities. A chance to return to the work she loved, to build something meaningful, to use everything she'd learned in a role that could make a real difference. And to do it here in Boston, near her family, near the life she'd been building, but with Michael in it this time. "I need to think about it," she said finally. "Talk to my father. Make sure he has a plan for replacing me if I leave. This isn't a decision I can make in one night." "Of course. Take all the time you need. The position won't be officially posted for another 2 months. Just promise me you'll consider it. I promise." They left the restaurant and walked through the city, talking about everything and nothing, hands clasped like teenagers. When they reached the waterfront, Michael pulled her close, and they stood there watching lights reflect off the harbor. "A year from now," Michael said softly. "Where do you see us?" Claire leaned back against his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady against her spine. "Together. However we make that work. Boston, New York, somewhere in between. But together." "Together," he echoed, and kissed the top of her head. "I like the sound of that." 3 months later, Claire stood in her new office on the 15th floor of Bennett Worldwide's Boston headquarters. The space was bright and modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. Her name was on the door: Claire Mitchell, Director of Sustainable Development. Her father had been surprised but supportive when she'd told him about the job offer. Her mother had been thrilled, though Claire still hadn't revealed that her new position was at the company run by the man she was dating. That secret had held for now, though Claire suspected it wouldn't last forever. Michael visited Boston every weekend, and Claire went to New York twice a month. They'd developed routines, their favorite restaurants, walking paths, the coffee shop where they'd meet on Sunday mornings. His health was stable, monitored carefully, and he'd kept his promise about working reasonable hours. And tonight, Claire was cooking dinner in Michael's New York apartment, their first dinner at his place since they'd started dating. She was stirring pasta sauce when she heard his key in the lock. "Claire?" he called. "Kitchen!" He appeared in the doorway, still in his work clothes, and the smile that crossed his face when he saw her made her heart skip. "You're really here, in my kitchen, cooking dinner. Don't get too excited. I'm not a great cook. I don't care." He crossed the space between them and pulled her into his arms. "You're here. That's all that matters." Later, after they'd eaten and were curled together on his couch, Michael turned to her with an expression of such contentment that it took her breath away. "What?" she asked. "I was just thinking about that blind date, about you in that terrible dress, looking like you wanted to be anywhere but there, and how it was the best night of my life because it brought you back to me." Claire smiled, snuggling closer. "I'm keeping that dress forever, you know. It's going in a frame. As it should. The dress that changed everything." He kissed her forehead. "Though I'm glad you wore the green one for our second date. Me too." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the city lights twinkle through the windows. Claire thought about the journey that had brought them here, the years of unspoken feelings, the pain of leaving, the impossible coincidence that had brought them together. It seemed almost too perfect to be real. "Michael?" she said quietly. "Thank you." "For what?" "For being brave enough to tell me how you felt. For making this work even when it was complicated. For loving me." He pulled her closer. "Claire Mitchell, loving you is the easiest thing I've ever done. Everything else is just details." And in that moment, sitting in his arms with her whole future spread out before her like a promise, Claire knew that sometimes the worst dress, the worst plan, the worst blind date could lead to the very best love story. The one that was worth waiting for, the one that was worth fighting for, the one that was, finally and completely, theirs.